basically, because I knew that what the other papers were in advance, I'm piggybacking.
Terribly sorry about
Yes.
that.
Okay.
I'm apologizing because I'm in the chair.
I'm piggybacking on some of the information that you've already received, because I didn't think there was really any point in giving you stats again, because I knew there was going to be quite a lot of stats in this session. So basically, my presentation, my paper is about the migrant in the imagination or the social representation of India and China. And I'm starting off with a discussion of how migrant people are portrayed, I mean economic migrants, we're talking about economic migrants here, are portrayed in the news media, and then have a brief overview of why it's important to look at popular culture in this case, given that it's a real world phenomenon, what does that do? And then some examples of portrayal of migrants in popular culture in India and China. And I study popular film, so we'll go into that. Basically, my premise is based on the idea of Anderson's imagination, which I think everybody already knows about, but also grounded in the idea of the Moscovici's social representation, that cultural imagery in fact affects the way that we perceive the world and affects the way that the nation is constructed in our minds and how we react to data. So I will continue. Actually the quality of this has shifted somewhat during all of this offing and onning. So I think that it should be fine. But if you can't quite see, I will explain. So this is what we're talking about: representations of domestic economic migration on the popular screen in India and China. And this is part of Juxtapose, as you know. So as we've been discussing, internal economic migration has been one of the most visible phenomena arising from development. The population includes vast swathes of people and as many circumstances. And, the numbers are huge that we're talking about, but they do, as we, learned from Charlotte's paper and probably some of your own research, it really does conceal certain details. Those large numbers conceal certain details about the populations that we're looking at. How are economic migrants normally portrayed and understood in the social psychologies of India and China? And in the media, they're most often portrayed and associated with loading of infrastructure, problems of health and overcrowding, crime. It's generally a negative picture, even though there's an understanding that these populations are necessary for economic growth. It's also true to say that it's a question in many people's minds, whether for political reasons or otherwise, whether this is a desirable flow. And that is borne out by plenty of research in an academic and a news media extent. You can see in this picture there is the Spring Festival rush in China, which is, you'll notice that these kinds of images are photographed from a high angle, which allows you to see this kind of vast sea of people, which is, a very primary way of describing this group of people, migrants, and they're usually always understood as rural to urban, economic migrants, less educated, and these are the cliches that are attached to this. And you invariably end up with these high-angle viewpoints of enormous quantities of people that exemplify this rush. And so this is VT in Mumbai when Assamese migrants returned to Guwahati in 2012. Again, you see that high-angle shot. So in such depictions, we can say that these people are little individuated and less understood by the very organizations that seek to analyze them, because we can say this is a common type of analysis to NGOs and news media. But the question is this really so simple? Should we rethink who is an economic migrant? And I'm just giving you a little bit of background and premise of what I'm about to say. So do the visions of such economic migrants on the entertainment screen mirror or challenge these mainstream views? And why does entertainment film matter here anyway? I think most of the people in this room are social scientists and they're wondering what I'm going on about. So I will answer by way of a link between these questions and my overall research. So the primary questions from my research are, how is cultural identity formed in rapidly growing economies like India and China? We've discussed this morning that India and China share many social problems, and they share many circumstances. And one of the premises of Juxtapose is that there is a unique pattern of like and unlike between India and China. And the social problems that they face are handled in very different ways. And so it is very interesting to see how these social problems are reflected in the imaginary of the population. And who participates in this cultural identity formation in culture, and for whose benefit? What culture, what nation, most importantly, what is this identity composed of? What citizen, what ideals, and what values? So my research focuses on European and Bollywood, so it's Hindi and Mandarin language films. It's textual, contextual, and visual analysis of top grossers. I do look at who's making the most money, because this is about how soluble the film is, who it affects, what it's about. And that is true. It's culturally soluble. As V.F. Perkins, who's a wonderful film theorist, points out, cinema comes from the legacy of public entertainments. It exists in space between market and censors. It's very particularly true in India and China. It's got this sort of status squeeze between market and censor sensibilities, participates in cultural and capital economies as well, and it's consumed by a wide range of people on multiple platforms, some of them legal, some of them illegal. China and India share history of the blending of entertainment and politics. So therefore, it's relevant to this construction of social representation, of Hua-ness, of Chineseness beyond borders, and of Desiness, of Indianness beyond national borders. So why Hindi and Mandarin? These are vehicular language. Many people ask me that. Widely used and within and without the nation as lingua franca, inherently linked to the project of modernity in the two countries. Both of these languages were codified and invested with a kind of lingua franca status at the time of early modernization and independence. So this, I call these vehicular languages. This is a term derived from Henri Gobard in his model popularized by Deleuze and Guattari on 4 levels of language function. Basically, vehicular language means that it's operable in most circumstances. Okay. So that explains why. And this is the negotiated crucible by which these kinds of things occur. There's many different things at play in the production of something like contemporary popular film. It's an economic product, it's as well as being a cultural product. Market, state, filmmakers, including everybody who plays a part in the aesthetics of the film, and the audience also do have feedback and power, and these create identity ideals. So all these actors have some kind of interest in creating a new understanding of what Hua and Desi are composed of. They have some kind of vested interests. So for a market perspective, it helps to, it helps to create market niches. So there is an economic value there. For a filmmaker, it also has a certain amount of economic value. Who is an economic migrant? This is the question that I want to get back to now that we've dealt with the film issue. For my purposes, it's someone seeking economic gain in another part of the country who moves to take advantage of it. This is a pretty simple definition. This is a fairly standard definition. If we consider it, we can see that the economic migrant is not just the un- or undereducated rural to urban migrant. I want to question these categories a little bit. For the purposes of the imagination, I want to question these things. If you're doing a study that's of a particular population, this has a different resonance. But if you're looking at what the migrant is in a sense of how the migrant is imagined, it creates a different set of circumstances. So on screen, I'm going to suggest we see 4 types emerging, conducting outward and inward journeys. And I would suggest to you that the migrant has been something that's been stalking Hindi film in particular for quite a long time. And that both industries are actually very much influenced by migrant workers coming to work in those industries. And perhaps built upon those stories. So my first film that I want to talk about, and please you're welcome to laugh, is Raju Bangaya Gentleman. Aziz Mirza, 1992, so right at the beginning of true economic reform. Now, not necessarily, your idea of, urban, a rural to urban, poor migrant, But this I'm going to suggest to you as an example of the entrepreneur spirit. He's desperate. He's absolutely desperate, Raju, to go to Mumbai. He says, he goes and prays. He send me to Mumbai, send me to Bombay somehow. He passes his exams. He goes and wants to be an engineer, and his ideals are kind of burst one by one until he takes on a relationship with a much more sophisticated, westernized woman. And you can see this entrepreneurial spirit. He's saying because a degree only gives you certificate, not brains, right? So, and his context is deliberately questioning this idea of consumerism. People around him where he's staying, in the colony where he's staying, are saying that, you shouldn't focus on money. But in the end, he gets seduced by money. And this, I want to suggest to you, is very interesting. And if you compare it to the other main, I think, character of the film, which is Jay. And he's an amazing person, played by Nana Patekar. He's the street philosopher. He's a prophet of economic migrants and foil to the idealistic Raju. He explains and gives a primer, and I challenge anybody to watch this and not be impressed. Explains to everybody gathered around him, who are by implication economic migrants. They're trying to work out what it is to live in the city. And he always does so in the background of these enormous buildings, these beautiful new modern buildings. That this is Bombay. You don't get anything for free here, and it's a city of basically of consumerism. And so this is a great foil to that entrepreneur spirit, and it kind of burst that bubble. So one of my Chinese examples is Renzai Zhongtu. I'm moving swiftly on because I have limited time. And this is Raymond Yip, directed 2010. And this is basically a kind of remake of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, about a kind of gentleman, an entrepreneur, and a city-based but migrant worker in that he's originally from a different part of the country, and he's moved to take on this job and become a manager of a toy factory. That he's come in there and he's meeting this sort of Nongmin type who's works at a dairy farm, a dairy factory rather, and he meets him accidentally and he can't get rid of him. And the film portrays these two migrant workers in very different ways. And I would argue that it's to do with class, it's to do with their wealth and their education level. And that is particularly specific and important to this question. The Nongmin type, whose name is Nyukung, he has brought with him, for example, these enormous bottles of milk to the airport. And he's told that he cannot bring these on the plane. And so he proceeds to drink all of them to the horror of everyone around him. So this is an example of the treatment. He's associated with innocence. He's the innocent, whereas Li Chenggong is the canny migrant worker who's become a flaneur. He's become an integrated member of the city, but at the same time, he is separated from his fellow man. He doesn't understand the people around him, and he feels fairly disgusted by them most of the time. In the end, these two make a return, and this is an important factor. They're doing the return journey. They make a return to their place of origin, and they're able to do that by also embodying certain kinds of cultural values. They encounter a charitable foundation and realize where they are situated vis-a-vis Chinese cultural norms. So this is a very normative kind of a film in a way, even though it's a fantastic comedy. So I will be quick. This is played by Wang Baoqiang, who's Nyukung, who's always playing this Shagun character. And that is derived from this sort of innocent character. He's associated with that innocent character. And I want to talk about The Dirty Picture, which I don't think anybody would really think of as an internal migrant, an economic migrant film. But actually, the reason that I want to talk about it is because it's one of the very few portrayals of a woman doing this kind of thing and taking economic control of her life. And it all ends disastrously. And that is another factor for the success or failure of these economic migrants. So I shall move very, very quickly on. I think I'm out of time. Oye Guigen is another film. Zhao, played by Zhao Benshan, his friend dies in the city, and he has to carry him. He's made a promise to carry him back to his home city, and this becomes an albatross around his neck, effectively, for a crime that he never committed. He's ultimately the dead character. Lee is ultimately the person who doesn't make the journey back, who doesn't get there, who doesn't get back to his home origin. He's fallen out of the society. And similar pictures from Renzai Zhongtu of people carrying other people. And I want to also mention very briefly in Yuva, this is the criminal element that Lalan Singh represents. He's forcibly in the city. He doesn't want to be in the city. He's migrated by accident and circumstance, and he's unable to return home despite his wife's pregnancy. Okay. So my conclusions are that treatment of economic migrants on screen varies according to several factors, including wealth and gender. This, along with aesthetic diversity, creates opportunities for multiple stories of economic migration despite normative environments in these films. Ultimately, independent films and such like may do a better job of capturing realism. I don't think anybody would doubt that. But will they reach economic migrants? Will they reach people who can then identify stories that can be ideals, can be idealistic, can be laughed at, can be engaged with? I think probably in most cases not. The solubility of entertainment films makes it a different factor. And so I believe that migrants of all types, and I do emphasize that I think we should think a little bit diversely about migrants in this kind of a circumstance. They also have a right to be heroes and to have a slice of romanticism and not just be the subject of studies that highlight how awful their lives are. And this is a foil to an argument against stereotype. And I have mixed feelings about it. So I think it can present an opportunity to write themselves. And I do mean that because, as I said, there are a lot of economic migrants in the industries into the imagination of the cities to which they have always belonged and in which they create their own identities on a regular basis.